In our last episode, we delved into the events of the pre-Diluvian world, the era leading up to the Great Flood. We left off pondering a fascinating question. Did anyone besides Noah and his family survive the cataclysmic flood? Now, uncovering a definitive answer to that question isn't exactly straightforward. It's not a simple, linear path. We'll have to navigate through various sources, piece together fragmented information, and draw connections from seemingly disparate places to arrive at a well-supported conclusion. But before we plunge deeper, let's establish a few essential guiding principles. Firstly, and most importantly, I firmly believe the Bible is the inspired Word of God, and as such, it embodies truth. I know some of you might disagree. I've seen the debates in the comments section. While I'm not necessarily looking to engage in those debates directly, though I might leave a comment here and there, I will say this. If your belief system lacks a foundational truth capable of withstanding scrutiny, your pursuit of truth is inherently shaky. The Bible itself poses the question, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Without a solid base, your beliefs will either lead you towards a stronger, more reliable foundation or leave you wandering aimlessly in uncertainty. That being said, reading and studying extra-biblical sources can be incredibly valuable and healthy when approached with discernment. While these sources may not always be entirely accurate, they can often contain factual kernels that lead us back to the truth. I'll never forget an experience I had while searching for deeper understanding. I walked into Barnes & Noble, headed straight for the Christian section, and found myself praying, God, I'm not looking for another fluffy, feel-good book. I don't want another self-help guide on living your best life or conquering the demons of every day. That stuff is fine, but it's not what I need right now. I need something substantive, something to bolster my theology, to deepen my understanding. And I felt this distinct impression, a voice in my spirit, saying, turn around. Hesitantly, I turned, and my gaze landed on the New Age section. My immediate thought was, not so, Lord. I don't think I'm going to find any truth over here. But then, a particular book caught my eye, The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin, as I recall. A wave of recognition washed over me. I remembered seeing that book when I was in middle school. I couldn't explain why, but the image was firmly planted in my mind. Intrigued, I picked it up and began reading. Now, let me be clear. I don't subscribe to Sitchin's ultimate conclusions about reality. Not at all. However, the sheer depth of his research into history, archaeology, and mythology was invaluable. It provided a richer context for my own faith, allowing me to better understand the world the Hebrews inhabited when Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, and so on. While I disagree with his interpretations because the Bible is my foundation, I can still learn from his work and build upon it. And that's what I challenge all of us to do. I hope you can do that as you're listening to me. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to make comments, share the videos. Let's get the conversation started, right? I call this podcast The Vertical Discourse because it reflects the principle found in Proverbs. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the honor of kings is to search it out. We are seeking to explore profound and challenging questions, and we're not pretending to have all the answers. Our theology should be a living, breathing thing, constantly evolving as we deepen our relationship with God. That doesn't mean abandoning our foundational beliefs, but rather allowing God to refine and expand our understanding. If my theology and my relationship with God aren't growing, my religion becomes stagnant and lifeless. And that's a trap I'm determined to avoid. So, with all that in mind, let's jump right in. We know, without a doubt, that Noah and his family survived the flood. The book of Hebrews tells us that there were 8 souls in total on the ark. Noah and his wife, whose name isn't mentioned, and their sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, along with their wives. It's safe to assume they had no other children at the time, since Noah's sons are there with him. Now, when we turn to the writings of Josephus, we find an expanded account. In his Antiquities of the Jews, specifically Book 1, Chapter 4, Section 1, Josephus describes the scene after they left the ark. The survivors were hesitant to descend into the valley, fearing the lingering effects of the flood. It's crucial to remember that the flood wasn't just a brief rainstorm followed by a picturesque rainbow. The earth was utterly devastated. Corpses still floated in the water, including the decaying remains of giants. Their terror was perfectly understandable. Josephus explains that they initially stayed together, bound by their shared fear and trauma. But then, the narrative takes an interesting turn. Let me read you the specific passage. Now, the plain in which they first dwelt was called Shinar. God also commanded them to send colonies abroad for the thorough peopling of the earth, that they might not raise seditions among themselves, but might cultivate a great part of the earth, and enjoy its fruits after a plentiful manner. Essentially, God instructed them to spread out and repopulate the earth, lest they become embroiled in conflicts like Abraham and Lot, whose growing numbers led to disputes. That's why God told them to split up, to avoid such seditions or quarrels. But they were so ill-instructed, Josephus continues, that they did not obey God, for which reason they fell into calamities. In other words, they defied God's command and remained united in one place. To fully grasp the significance of this disobedience, we need to understand the subsequent events. We must move forward in the narrative, gaining ample information to then circle back and analyze the motivations behind their actions. They chose to stay together. But why? Now, it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. Josephus writes, "He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness." This is where things get really interesting. The phrase, "not to ascribe it to God, but to believe that it was their own courage," reminds me of Cain, who, after being cursed for killing Abel, rejected that curse and resolved to obtain things through his own efforts. We hear of him accomplishing it by violence, by rape, and a whole bunch of other things. He procured wealth to himself. And then his descendants such as Lamech, whose name means powerful. He ended up doing the same thing. In Nimrod, we see a continuation of that same pre-flood legacy of defiance and self-reliance. This raises a crucial question. Where did Nimrod derive this evil intent? The pre-flood world, rife with Nephilim and rampant wickedness, was supposedly washed away. Where did he find inspiration? To answer that, we need to explore two avenues. First, we must delve deeper into the biblical text, and second, we can examine cultural stories and myths for additional clues. I'm going to start with cultural stories and then we're going to double back. Actually, first let me start with the Bible in this regard. Let's turn to Genesis 10, often called the Table of Nations. Starting with verse 8 we read, "Cush fathered Nimrod, who began to be a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord." Now, some translations render "before the Lord" as "in the face of the Lord" or "against the Lord." In this context, before implies being in God's presence. Just as the commandment states, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," meaning no other gods in my presence. Nimrod was a tyrant in God's presence. The phrase, "a tyrant from the Lord," is similar to how Saul was afflicted with an evil spirit from the Lord, suggesting a spirit that was rogue and apart from God. So, Nimrod was a tyrant from the Lord in that sense. Looking at cultural accounts, Nimrod is often associated with the Sumerian king Gilgamesh, considered the first potentate after the deluge. I lean towards believing this connection is accurate. There are just too many striking parallels to dismiss. Both are credited with building the Tower of Babel, constructing walled cities, leading people away from God, and establishing tyrannical rule over the earth. And both lived shortly after the flood. Of course, there are differences that give us pause and cause us to question. For example, when you look at the prologue to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is an Attian epicum that is credited for being the oldest piece of literature that we have, which it is not, we see some language and we see some things that give us pause. The prologue reads, "I will proclaim to the world the deeds of Gilgamesh. This was the man to whom all things were known. This was the king who knew the countries of the world. He was wise. He saw mysteries and knew secret things. He brought us a tale of the days before the flood." Interesting, right? Keep that in mind. He went on a long journey, was weary, worn out with labor. Returning, he rested. He engraved on the stone the whole story. When the gods created Gilgamesh, they gave him a perfect body. Shamash, the glorious sun, endowed him with beauty. And so on. 2/3 God they made him and 1/3 man. That detail is also crucial. In Uruk he built walls, a great rampart to honor the god Anu, the goddess Ishtar, also known as Inyana. And it says that the 7 sages laid the foundation. If you recall from previous discussions, we talked about the 7 sages who were credited with bringing civilization to humanity. They witnessed the fragile and primitive state of humanity and bestowed knowledge upon them. But who were these 7 sages? According to various sources, these 7 sages were antediluvian Nephilim characters who survived the flood. In Sumerian lore, they're called the Abkalu, the 7 sages of humanity, as recorded by Berosus the Chaldean, who was also a priest of Marduk. And this is actually quoted by Josephus. He's the one who quotes Berosus, and this is found in Antiquities, which we just read. They are credited with different aphorisms for which we live our life by, or certain people live their life by. One of them is know thyself. There's also an African aphorism that says know thyself and you will know the gods. All of that comes from here. Know thyself is often credited to Socrates. But Socrates was the mentor of Plato, and Plato was the one who wrote about Atlantis and the 7 sages who survived this antediluvian flood. So what we read here about Gilgamesh, his beauty, him being 2/3 god and 1/3 man, all of this is found in the first tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now later on in that same tablet, I'm not going to get into the whole story of Gilgamesh. We'll go over that another time. There is a place where he's looking and he's searching for eternal life. And he understands that there is someone who survived the flood that he wants to go see. So when they're saying this, the implication is that Gilgamesh was born after the flood, which Nimrod was born after the flood because again there were only 8 people on that boat. And if Nimrod is the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, who was the son of Noah, he was not alive at the time of the flood. So Gilgamesh is going to go find one of his forefathers, Utnapishtim, or he's also known as the Faraway, right? He lives in the land of Dilmun, and he's the one who tells him how the gods told him they were going to destroy the earth, and they saved him, and his wife is Utnapishtim Noah and is Gilgamesh Nimrod. So the first thing that I want to do is let's start with Nimrod, and then we'll take a look at Gilgamesh, because if we can't reconcile these 2 individuals, then we have a problem. Both of them are said to have lived after the flood. But Gilgamesh is said to be from his father Lugula, and Lugband is an interesting character. We'll talk about him a little bit later. Nimrod is the son of Cush. So let's follow the biblical account. So Noah is on the ark. He's got his family with him. This kind of goes back to the question, how did Nimrod end up becoming such an evil person when all evil has been eradicated before he was born, right? Because he couldn't have been born on the ark because he's the son of Ham. And Ham, when Ham went on, he didn't have any children. So even if he had children while he was there, Nimrod's a whole generation out. So I actually want to direct your attention towards chapter 9 of the book of Genesis, because in order to understand Nimrod, we have to understand his lineage. So Noah gets off the ark with his family. He's got his son Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now a lot of people say the curse of Ham. That's not a thing. It's the curse of Canaan. It's because of Ham. And a lot of people say that, oh Noah, the Bible says that he got drunk when he created the vineyard, and Ham, committed a very sinful act against him, of homosexuality or whatever the case is. That's not true. The Bible here says that while Noah was sleeping, Ham uncovered his nakedness. And then it says that when Noah woke up and realized what he had done, he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Now, there's a lot of problems here, because I'm like, well, why would he curse Canaan if Ham did something? And why would he curse Canaan when Ham has other sons? So Canaan is the son of Ham. But according to the Table of Nations, the first and oldest son of Ham is Cush. Then there's Misraim. Then there's Put. Then there's Canaan. Canaan is number 4. So why is he getting cursed? Well, we have to understand language. Remember, Moses wrote Genesis. He also wrote the next 4 books of the Bible. And when he was writing the law, he was talking about different acts that were a sin and an abomination. He said that if a man lays with another man's wife, he has uncovered that man's nakedness, right? So in this language here, we see that it says, while Noah was sleeping, Ham uncovered his nakedness, and then he told his brothers outside what he had done. Translation: while Noah is sleeping and drunk. Ham actually sleeps with his mother, and then he goes out and tells his brothers what he has done. His brothers come in and they cover his mother. Now we can also assume here that he doesn't just do this. Make no mistake, this was no voluntary act on her part. She was raped and she got pregnant, and that son was Canaan, right? So, let's look at the curse. When Noah awoke from his drinking and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Can cursed, he will be the lowest of slaves to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave." Now, that's a problem, because my first thought was just like, you said that he would be a slave to his brothers. So, does that mean he's going to be a slave to Cush, Mizraim, and Put, since he's the son of Ham? No. You said he's going to be the slave of Shem, which means that Shem is his brother. He says, "Let God extend Japheth. Let Japheth dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave." So if Canaan is Shem's slave and he's going to serve his brothers, that means that Shem and Canaan are brothers. Same mother, different fathers, right? So you can already see the abomination has already started in the earth. Why is this important? Because there's different levels. Sin, iniquity, and transgression are not the same thing. Sin is an individual act. Iniquity is when sin becomes compounded, so much so without any type of repentance or forgiveness, that it gets into your bloodstream, and now it has generational repercussions. Now keep in mind, Nimrod is not in the lineage of Canaan. He's in the lineage of Cush, but he is still a son of Cush, who is a son of Ham. And all of Ham's family is feeling the repercussions of this. They actually leave and they go in a different direction. They separate. That's where part of this dispersion takes place. So, it's easy to see that a portal of iniquity, a gate of iniquity, has been opened up inside of Ham's bloodline, and Nimrod is not happy about it. Now, we can understand his disdain now, but it still leaves a whole lot of gaps in how he ends up getting to where he is now. How does Nimrod end up becoming such a powerful figure in the earth? According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the foundations of his kingdoms that he built were laid by the 7 sages. Let's just say that these 7 sages are real and they actually live. Now, understand this as well. When I say live, it may not necessarily be in the flesh, because these 7 sages are Nephilim. That means that they are half mortal and half divine. Even if their bodies have decayed, they're still spirits dispossessed of their body and still wandering, trying to find a home. Is it possible because of the iniquity that was opened up in Ham's family? These dispossessed spirits at some point found Nimrod. And could he have been possessed with one of those spirits? It would make sense with him being 2/3 God and 1/3 man, because a spirit that is greater than himself has come and entered his physical body. So now all of a sudden this claim of him being 2 of 3 God or 2 of 3 divine makes sense, because he has a greater portion of a spiritual entity possessing his body. That would make sense, and that would account for the physical strength that he has. That might account for any growth that he finds later on in his body. A lot of things that we can't necessarily know, but it begins to solidify a couple of things between Nimrod and Gilgamesh. So, if we're saying that he was possessed by a spirit before the flood, who was that spirit? And can we even know? I believe that we can, though it requires delving into some rather obscure texts. When you look at the Book of Giants, you actually see these Nephilim gathering together, almost like a council of war, and discussing these troubling dreams, these visions of a calamity that's about to engulf the earth. They're frantically trying to figure out what, if anything, they can do to stop it. And significantly, one of the Nephilim present at this pre-Diluvian meeting is Gilgamesh. Now, the Epic of Gilgamesh itself seems to contradict this, claiming that he wasn't around before the flood. But the Book of Giants, which offers a different perspective, clearly places him there. So, let's entertain this idea. Gilgamesh is present at this meeting before the cataclysm. His physical body, however, doesn't survive the flood, but his spirit endures. He becomes a roaming, disembodied entity searching for a suitable host, a willing vessel. He finds it in Nimrod. And now, Nimrod is no longer just a man. He's 2/3 God, 1/3 man, a hybrid being. And he's being guided, influenced, perhaps even controlled by these other demonic spirits, these remnants of the pre-flood world. Their goal? To build a new civilization, one that mirrors, or perhaps even surpasses, the wickedness of the old. Nimrod becomes the first post-diluvian potentate, a powerful ruler guided by dark forces. Sounds a lot like Cain, doesn't it? Sounds a lot like Lamech, these figures from the antediluvian world who embraced wickedness. It sounds like iniquity starting all over again because Nimrod was a willing participant, a vessel for these malevolent spirits. Now, what about Utnapishtim, the faraway, the Babylonian Noah? Because it still sounds like we could be borrowing stories, that the biblical account is simply adapting earlier Mesopotamian myths. Well, that's another problem, another layer of complexity that we're running into, because the name Utnapishtim actually shows up in the Sumerian king list. The Sumerian king list, as you know, is a comprehensive list of both antediluvian and post-diluvian kings. So, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim is portrayed as this wise, older gentleman, a survivor of the flood who offers counsel and wisdom to Gilgamesh, a somewhat pastoral character, almost a mentor figure. So, the question becomes, did we borrow that story from them, or did they borrow it from us? Well, according to the Sumerian king list and other sources, Utnapishtim was another Nephilim tyrant before the flood. His reign, however, was cut short, interrupted by, what else? The flood, right? Now, if he's showing up again after the flood, one of two things must have happened. Either he's one of these dispossessed spirits like Gilgamesh that's found a way to exert influence in the post-diluvian world, or he actually survived the flood in some way. Both of those things are possible. We just don't definitively know which one it is. So we're tracing the lineage of Gilgamesh. We're tracing the lineage of Utnapishtim. And it seems plausible, based on these ancient texts, that they could have survived, either physically or spiritually, the Great Deluge. It's possible they could have found someone to possess, someone who survived, and worked through them. So, we still have a few things that we don't necessarily know for sure. Now, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh has a patron god, a protector, and that patron god is his father, the holy Lugalbanda. Lugalbanda is also mentioned in the Sumerian king list as being a ruler in Uruk, specifically Shuruppak, and he was the son of, I believe his name is in Merkur. And basically, what I want to say about Lugalbanda is that he actually has his own story, a separate epic in which he was going to fight against this other city. He somehow fell ill, in a manner that I don't believe was specifically described in the text. And he's left in a cave to die, abandoned by his comrades. However, he cries out to the gods, begging for help. And the gods hear his plea. They grant him new life, they heal him miraculously. And they stress the fact that he was healed by divine intervention, right? And he either, in some versions of the story, goes on to war and becomes a great conqueror, leading his people to victory. And in other versions, he simply goes back to his home and becomes a great king, a wise and just ruler, and ultimately the father of Gilgamesh, who, as we know, is 2/3 god, 1/3 man. Is there any truth in that? I honestly don't know. Now, the kingdom that he was going against, the city he was preparing to fight, was Aratta, which interestingly means highlands. Now, it's funny because when I hear that, I immediately think of Mount Ararat, which was the place where Noah's Ark actually came to rest after the flood. So, is there some fabrication here, some blending of the two stories, where one is copying or perhaps adapting the other? I guess what I want to posit is, what if it's not that he went into that cave to die? What if being in that cave was actually what saved him from a cataclysmic destruction, perhaps the flood itself? We're running into a brick wall as far as what we can definitively find out about Nimrod, about his origins and motivations. So, if we can't move backward anymore, if we've exhausted the available extra-biblical sources, let's keep moving forward, let's delve into the biblical record itself. This is where things get really exciting. So, where is the first place that we see news of giants? Because remember, Genesis 6 said, "Now there were giants in those days, when the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful and took as many of them as wives as they wanted. There were giants in those days and afterward." The first specific place that we see a reference to these giants, a concrete example, is in Genesis 14, where it talks about these 4 kings verses 5. And when you're reading this passage, you realize, wait a minute, These are races of giants involved in this war. This is actually warfare on an astronomical scale. This is like World War I, but fought by giants. Why is this not being given more credit? Why is this relegated to just a side story in the story of Abraham leaving Ur of the Chaldees? This is the really interesting thing about it. One of the civilizations that you see there in that war is the Amalekites. Now, I don't know if that gives you pause, but that definitely gives me pause, right? Because Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Esau. Esau begot Eliphaz. And Eliphaz begot Amalek, who is traditionally known as the father of the Amalekites. So, how are the Amalekites already in a battle for generations before their progenitor is even born? That makes no sense, right? Also, when you look at Numbers 24, when Balaam is trying to curse Israel, but he has to bless them instead, he says, Amalek, you are first among the nations. Well, what does that even mean? Does that mean that they're the first rated among the nations? Well, no. We have a race of people here who are participating in a war of giants, and they're called the first among the nations. And we also see that they're called the Amalekites before Amalek is even born. We also look when the spies went out with Joshua and Caleb and they said, oh, we saw the Amalekites in the land, the sons of Anak, right? So we see Amalekites and Anakites mentioned in the same breath, often together. And it's also interesting with the name Anak. You have the letters An, and then you've got the letter K. The reason I bring that up is because N is almost always a head nod to the sky god. And just like Anu is the god of the sky, and then Ki is the earth. So Anak is kind of like a marriage of those two terms, a connection between heaven and earth. And a lot of times you'll see names that, one, reflect the God that they believe in, and then two, you'll see a name that points back to an ultimate progenitor, an ancestor of renown, right? So Amalekite or Amalek and Anak seem to have a little bit of similarity to them. One is pointing to the other, suggesting a common origin or influence. So we've made a connection, however tenuous, between the Amalekites and the Anakites. So let's see how far back we can trace them. Because we had to move forward to find the Amalekites, and now we're able to trace them back. Okay, so these Amalekites, did they come from somebody named Anak or Anch? And we've got the sons of Anak who are Talmai, Sheshai, and Ahiman, right? These great warriors who are known as the sons of Anak, but they're also known as the sons of Arba. So we've got the terms Amalek, we've got Anak, and we've got Arba. And you see all of these names in Genesis. Can we put something together here, piece together the puzzle to find out who's who? So, first of all, we know that the Amalekites lived in Seir. And I want to read something to you here. It says that, as for the true identity of the lost Amalekite nation, logic suggests the Amalekites were part of the Horites. Remember, the Horites dwelt in Seir, the land of the southern Amalekites. Additionally, the Amalekites were an ancient nation that dwelt from Shur to Egypt since ancient times. Strangely, Seir does not have a father listed in the Table of Nations, even though the Table of Nations recorded Seir as the father of the Horites who dwelt in Seir before they arrived there. So, you've got this person named Seir and you've got these Horites. Now, and Seir actually means hairy, which is interesting because a lot of Nephilim were known for being hairy. Actually, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is a tyrant, and they pray for his equal to be created. And Enkidu is created to be his equal. And when people are describing him, they talk to say, oh, he has long hair like the goddess of corn, Shamhat, right? But they say that he is the spitting image of Gilgamesh. He's a little shorter. Oh, he's bigger of bone. But we can also understand that he was hairy because after Enkidu dies a little bit later, and Gilgamesh is not grooming himself, his hair grows out and he looks like a wild animal. So, one of the traits of Nephilim is being very hairy, right? Seir was over the Horites, right? And Horites means cave dwellers, which is interesting because we talked about Lugalbanda before, the father of Gilgamesh, who stayed in a cave to survive. Is it possible that someone went into a cave during this flood, that maybe led into an inner cavern of the earth? Because remember, life was destroyed from the face of the earth, not inside the earth. And remember when Lucifer stood before God, he said, "Where have you come from? Walking to and fro on the earth and going up and down in it." Right? So, on and in are two different things. I don't know. But I do want to go ahead and start putting some genealogies together here. So, Seir was a Nephilim who had two children named Lotan, Alvin, and a daughter named Timnah. Lotan gave birth to Hori, who was the father of the Horites. So, the same way we've got Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob got his name changed to Israel, and all of those are known as the Israelites. Seir had Lotan, Lotan had Hori, and then all of their children became known as the Horites, right? Now, one of the generals in this 4 Kings verses 5 was someone named Anah, or Anah. And a lot of times you'll find consonants being changed in language. So, Anah very well could have been Anak, this great warrior, who was the progenitor of the Anakites that we see with the spies. And I can show you some places where we see languages like that change. The Bible says that Eber had a son named Peleg, because he was born when the world was divided. So, Peleg is spelled P-L-E-G. But later on in the book of Daniel, when we see the writing on the wall and it says Min Tekel Upharsin, we go over those individual writings and we get to the third one, which is Perez, which means divided. So Peleg divided, Perez divided, they're not spelled the same. Some of the consonants are different, but it comes down to the same meaning. So, it's very possible that this Anah who governs over the Horites is Anak, right? So, Seir begot Lotan, begot Hori, who begot Anah, who had 2 children, Dishon and Oholibamah. That's a lot of names to follow. Why is this important? Because again, Seir begot Lotan, but he also had a daughter named Timnah. Esau is known for marrying Canaanite women who displeased his family. One of his wives was Oholibamah. Esau is marrying into a Nephilim family. This is how Esau becomes Edom, but we'll talk about that another time. Esau has a son named Eliphaz, and Eliphaz marries Timnah, the daughter of Seir. They give birth to Amalek, right? Or at least we believe his name is Amalek. It's possible that his name was changed to Amalek to commemorate someone that was a progenitor to him. So, I guess the best question is, was there an Amalek before the flood? Apparently there was, and he had a twin brother named Samuel, and their mother was Naamah, the daughter of Lamech. That's interesting. We just tied a whole bunch of stuff together. Are you saying that the Amalekites who were a thorn in the side of the Israelites are the direct descendants of Lamech, who the Bible mentions in Genesis? That individual that we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to when we read about him growing up in Sunday school? He was just a name that we ignored. He's a progenitor. Well, think about it. Lamech sounds a lot like Amalek. When we look at the word Amalek, MLK are the letters that we or the letters that we follow there. And again, there tends to be some derivatives of it. But when you break down the language, that's what it comes down to, and it means king or it means potentate. Lamech means powerful or potent. King, potentate, right? So Amalek is a nod to this Lamech. So again, Lamech was a descendant of Cain. He had his 3 sons, Jabal, Jubal, Tubal-Cain, and he had his daughter, Naamah. Naamah is believed to have married one of the Watchers, Shemhazai, and she has 2 twin boys. One of them is named Samuel after his father, and the other one is named Amalek after her father, right? So, now we're starting to really connect some dots here. Now, this is from Gary Wayne's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. He says, listed among the names of antediluvian Nephilim was named Amalek. He was noted as the twin brother of Shemhazai. We now have an actual antediluvian giant to trace this imagination back to, for Amalek was the forefather of Seir. In another tradition, Amalek was the prominent antediluvian Sumerian king Akkadum-Dug. Understanding that Akkadum was Sumerian for the infamous evil Lamech, which found its true anagram in producing the name Amalek, and that all the antediluvian Sumerian kings were Nephilim. So now we have Lamech being tied to the Sumerian king list. And now all of this stuff, even the Epic of Gilgamesh, is starting to tie back together. So we've been able to look at truth, the Bible, and we've been able to look at legends from mythologies, and while they don't hold credibility in truth, there is the story there of deception that we can extract the true narrative from. He says we can also connect yet another variant name of a king to Amalek. Anamelech pronounced Anamelech. Anamelech was worshipped by the Babylonian people from the city of Sepharvaim. Melech, as we will learn later, is Hebrew for king, as in Molech, the god of the Canaanites, son of Baal, who required the sacrifice of children in his worship. So again, there we have a tie between Lamech, one of the descendants of Cain, and them surviving the flood, and not just surviving the flood, but becoming a thorn in the side of the chosen people. Right? I really wish that I could keep going on this. My son's waking up in the next room, so I kinda got to jump into dad mode. So, again, hate to leave it on a cliffhanger, but we're gonna have to end it here. Hope you guys are doing well. Till next time, take care.